Well, good evening, and welcome and welcome to today's session for Oxford's Humanitas Visiting Chair in Voice and Classical Music. I want to acknowledge the inspiration of Lord Weidenfeld and the Institute's strategic dialogue in setting up the programme, and to pay tribute to the Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust, who now manage the chair. And it's a huge pleasure to welcome to Oxford Joyce DiDonato. Joyce is a multi-Grammy Award winner and a 2018 Olivier Award winner for Outstanding Achievement in Opera. Joyce entrances audiences across the globe. With a voice that is, quote, nothing less than 24 karat gold, Joyce has towered to the top of the industry as a performer, a producer, and a fierce advocate for the arts. Her repertoire spans over 4 centuries. She has a varied and highly acclaimed discography, and her projects are in industry leading. Notable among these is the Eden Project, one that unites music, drama and education to confront questions of our individual connection to nature. Comprised of a tour of over 45 venues across 5 continents, this is running between 2022 and 24, it will produce an Erato album, an education program and multiple partnerships. Eden's long-term impact and legacy will be far-reaching, and her passionate belief and the driving force behind Eden is that a collective return to our best selves is needed not only to address our current climate crisis, but also our crisis of heart. In opera, Joyce's recent roles include Agrippina at the Metropolitan Opera and in a new production of the same at the Royal Opera House, Didon in Les Troyens at the Vienna Staatsoper, Sister Helen in Dead Man Walking in Madrid and at the Barbican Centre, Semiramide at the Bavarian State Opera and Royal Opera House, and Charlotte in Werther also at the Royal Opera House. An exclusive recording artist with Warner Classics Erato, Joyce's expansive bibliography includes Les Troyens, which won the Gramophone Recording of the Year, and Agrippina, which won the Gramophone's Opera Recording of the Year. Joyce's other albums include her Grammy Award-winning Diva Devo, which was followed by Drama Queens. Everybody will remember the cover of that one. Other honours include the Gramophone Artist and Recital of the Year Awards, and she has the distinction of being an inaugural inductee into the Gramophone Hall of Fame. Jake Heggie writes of her, "The staggering, joyful artistry of Joyce DiDonato reminds us that in any generation there are few giants. Joyce is not only a great, brave and inspiring artist, one of the finest singers of our time, but she is also a transformative presence in the arts. Those who know her repertoire are in awe of her gifts, and those who know nothing of it are instantly engaged. Joyce sings, and the world is suddenly brighter. She compels us to listen actively, to hear things anew." And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Suzanne Aston, who is a professor in the Faculty of Music. Suzanne's work is on opera and issues of identity, and her books include The Rival Sirens and Operatic Geographies. One strand of her current research is of interest to many of us here, as she is exploring the culture of country house opera in modern Britain. Joyce DiDonato.
Joyce, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here, and clearly an assembled audience who've already been delighted by your masterclass this afternoon. I think we have some masterclass participants here as well. So thank you so much for your stamina. Your career has really, I would say, helped to shape opera in the first part of the 21st century. And certainly the position of early 19th century repertoire and 18th century repertoire. You know, we hear that music through your voice in many ways. I wonder, I mean, there are particular composers, particular operas to which you keep returning. Rossini, Donizetti, obviously Mozart, Handel. I wonder if you feel that your representation of those roles, like Rosina in Barbara of Seville, how's that changed over the course of your career? And how have those roles, do you think, changed you, changed your voice?
Oh, the big question.
Yeah.
We're at Oxford, right? Okay. I feel so fortunate to have sort of come of age as a performer when Handel was being reestablished as not only as a viable operatic composer, but dramaturgically, just almost anything could go with a Handel opera. And I do think Handel has taught me more than any other composer about how to fill in the blanks, about how to go deep into the subtext and psychology of any character. You have an 8-minute aria with 2 sentences. And how do you make sense of that? It's challenging, and it absolutely really formed so much of how I approach music. I also, very early on in my training at the Houston Grand Opera, I was a young artist there for basically 3 years. I stayed a 3rd year just for the free voice lessons. And every year they did a world premiere. And so my first world premiere was Jackie O by Michael Dougherty, and then Little Women by Mark Adamo. And then that 3rd year, I premiered Todd Macover's Resurrection. So definitely not 18th century music, but it was so informative to me to look at a score and have that as the only blueprint. There was no recording, there was no traditional performance practice. I had to really, for the first time ever, create a character out of just the black and white notes on the page. I could talk to the composer, which was really fantastic and interesting, but it was like being thrown off the ledge without a parachute. And I think that taught me how to look at a score like Barbara of Seville, or Agrippina, or Les Troyens. It taught me how to trust what the composer had put down on paper first, and then fill out my, other singers have done this, that's possible. But I never was a singer that went to recordings first. I've always really trusted my dialogue with the page first. And so that, I think, allowed me to go into the Cenerentolas and Cherubinos and Rosinas with a fresh perspective. Even though a lot of the tunes were familiar, etc., all the recitatives, we were talking about recits earlier, that music, I never assumed I knew how it went, even if it was familiar. And that meant that I started from scratch. And so I think the combination of that approach, especially with Handel in this period where we could really do very dramatic things theatrically in the world of Handel, it just sort of felt like we weren't doing something that was 300 years old. We were creating something new. And I think that's what I work on a lot with the classes of like, wait, don't assume that that's where this phrase goes, but really discover it in the moment. And if that's something that I've helped shift for these pieces that we all know how they go, which is death for art, it's death for a listener, it's death for an artist, to stay present and figure it out in the moment, find it in the moment, I'd be really proud if I helped bring that into the forefront.
So you don't think the roles, something like Rosina, you don't think that doing it over and over and over again has changed you as a singer?
Oh, okay, so that's the second part of the question, for sure. And I've had this strange career. I've never talked to other singers. I don't know if it's similar, but I feel like the big roles came to me in a very parallel moment in my life. Rosina was all about freedom and inhibition, and I did not arrive on the operatic scene with freedom and inhibition. She taught me that, and I love her for that. Cenerentola was very much about no matter how bad things are, trust in the goodness that is there. She taught me that. I loved being on stage as Agrippina and feeling what that power is. And, you know, I mean, to sing her in the height of the Trump era, not the height, what felt like the height, what I thought might be the height, what I hoped might be the height. Let's see if it's the height. You know, that was extraordinary to be playing her as the headlines were showing the same thing. That's exhilarating and amazing, and it just gave me some comfort that it's like, oh, right, this is not our first time on the merry-go-round, right? This is what we do as humans. Yeah, they've all taught me something.
So a sort of sense with Agrippina that vocally you're doing something new. You're challenging yourself to be with the notes and with what they tell you, but the story tells you, yes, this is something we've done before.
100%. It's a really tricky balance because as I look at it now and as I was in performance, you see so many parallels. This is why we have art, and thank goodness. We learn so much about where we are, if we're paying attention, by going to the masters. T.S. Eliot, you know, Handel, Mozart, Da Ponte. We learn so much about ourselves, and we go, oh, there that is, right, that's what I do, or that's what we do. But then at the same time, when the curtain goes up, it must be as if this is happening for the first time as a performer. And I can't know where it's going to end by the end of the night. I have to stay so present, and I have to keep searching through all of those 9 arias and the hundreds of pages of just recitative. It's a frightening role, eh? It's like recit, where all the information and drama is. And this is ultimately probably what singing has taught me, is I have to be in the moment, period.
So you don't have that. I mean, obviously with Agrippina, there are relatively few people who've kind of come before you who, at least whose weight sits with the audience. That's not the case with other, you know, it's not the case with Rosina, for example. And so you've said you didn't go first to the recordings. Do you have a sense of these other great mezzos who've come before you and how they've spoken to those roles or dialogued with those roles? And, you know, are you paying homage to them? Are you saying, no, I'm going to make my mark and do something different? Or both?
Well, I think it's another great question. I think it's a mixture. I absolutely know and have a close relationship to, you know, Berganza, Marilyn Horne, Jennifer Larmore, who was at the top. Cecilia Bartoli just broke my world open. So I was an undergrad at Wichita State University, and she had just burst onto the scene. I don't know, she's just a few years older than me, not 2 or 3, 4 maximum. But she started so young, and I was very much 10 years behind her, at least, more in getting my career started. I was a late bloomer. But the first time it was on, I think, PBS, it was a concert. I'm sure you've all seen it with piano. And it just was like the heavens parted, and I went, that's what you're supposed to do with text. The way she crafted it and sculpted it. And I know everybody was like, oh, the coloratura is amazing. Yes, yeah, amazing, like never heard before, right? But the way she relished and bit in and used the text, that was life-changing for me. And she just sort of went, and now here's the bar. So at that point, I was barely starting to look at Rossini. And literally my first aria was not Una voce poco fa, it was Berta's aria, because I had no high notes. And so Berta is the maid. And she has an aria that usually most people wish was cut by the end of the opera, but, you know, and I competed with it. I didn't know what I was doing. And it was I was listening to all these singers, and I knew the style, I knew the thing. But when it was my turn to learn Rosina, I didn't study it through a recording. I'd heard them, I'd seen it on television, but I left all that behind and I went to the score.
And sort of shortly after this, you went to Houston, right, to learn your craft more thoroughly, and you spent your 3 years there with the lessons. And it was at that point that a voice coach said to you, you need to reshape your voice, right?
Well, that's a slightly more polite way than what he said. It was my first week in the studio, and at that time, and still today, the Houston Grand Opera is a really coveted place to go. It's the top tier training before you're launched, hopefully. And I just got in by sort of sheer luck, I feel. I barely got into that program, but another mezzo was leaving, and so there was one additional space. And it was the first week, and I was so elated, and I thought maybe I finally made it. I was 26, which for a lyric mezzo is, I won't say it's old, but tick-tock. And he vocalized me in our first lesson, and after about 5 minutes, he stopped, and he said, Joyce, he said, I think, you're very talented. I can see you're smart. And he said, but there's no future in the way you're singing. You're singing on youth and muscle. And that will last you a few more years. And that's it. And he then, we were talking about this in the class today, John. He then put his thumb sort of where the base of the tongue is enmeshed in the jaw, and he sort of forced it up. I mean, it didn't hurt me, but sort of forced it. And there was this tug of war between the base of my tongue and his thumb, and the base of my tongue and my thumb, because that's how I made music. And he just forced it to release. And he said, now sing ah. And I went, and I tried to find it with the base of my tongue, and I couldn't, and I just went, ah. He goes, now we can start. And I spent the next 9 months cracking and cracking and cracking. And he kept saying, that's good. That means you're letting go. Wow. Because we had to break down all that muscle tension. And then it was another year to replace that with the breath.
So what did that do to you? And I mean, personally, mentally, as you sort of said, this is my career path, and then you're taken back to basics. And what does that do to your sense of, hey, what were all my other teachers doing?
Oh, well, I was already sort of feeling that. There was when he first said that, again, I was 26. Had I been 21 or 22, I don't think I would have had this reaction. But I sort of went, oh, he gets it. I was relieved. 21 or 22, I would have been like, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what we think we know everything at that age. There was a degree of relief. And immediately I sensed that he might have the answer, because there was an element of singing kind of with my fingers crossed behind my back, like, please work, please work, please work. And that's a terrible feeling as a singer, because to get to the level of artistry and to be the kind of singer we dream of, we need total freedom technically, so that we can do anything we want with our voice, like Ella Fitzgerald, like Pavarotti, that's like Bartoli, that's the goal. And if we're honest with ourselves, we know when it's not working. But it is so frightening to let go of that thing that at least gets you through the phrase, because it might break. But it has to break. So at the beginning there was relief. And then the next 2 years, as I was breaking it down and then building it back, and then really it was that third year, it's why I stayed, I needed to learn to trust it. It was working, but I would get up in front of people and I'd be like, oh, maybe it's not going to be there, and I would fall backwards a little bit. And so it took another year to really trust it. So I was 29. Everybody else of my colleagues were getting agents and were getting cast and were getting attention and all of this, and I wasn't. And that tenacity, I'd be making it up now if I say I knew where it came from. It's just something in me was like, I've got to keep trying. I've got to try. I don't know what's going to happen, but I got to keep trying. And I'll know when I don't want to try anymore, but I'm not there yet. And I kept giving myself permission. You know, if I hit a point that I'm done, I still say that to myself. If I hit a point where I'm done, I walk away no problem, because I never want to feel tied to it. But it was devastating in many ways, because I had all of this inside of me, but it wasn't formulated yet. And I couldn't understand why the world didn't see it. But I stayed with it.
And did the world see it after that?
I have no idea.
Was it straight away?
It's a work in progress. I mean, yes, but it took more time, because there's another big part of the story is that when this started working, I did a competition, and it was a very important one, and I was extremely well prepared. I was as prepared as you could be, and everything was right. The way I looked, or the way I presented myself, the way I was coached, my diction, my repertoire, it was all exactly correct. And I got feedback that devastated me, and it said, yeah, Miss Di Donato, we, the universal we, the jury, didn't feel you had anything to offer as an artist. And it destroyed me, because I thought, I just figured everything out. Why? And it derailed me for months. Just as other things were starting to percolate and start to happen, and then I would go on stage full of doubt. And I'd never really had my integrity as an artist questioned before. A lot about my voice and the quality and all of that, but never like my soul as a musician, which is why it hurt so much. And after that initial pain, I was like, okay, why did they say that? I don't think they're just cruel. Why? And I sat with it for a long time, and finally one day I went, they were right. I wasn't saying anything. I was regurgitating and presenting exactly as I told it needed to be, and the way I imagined a classical singer should be, and the way I thought it should look, and the way I thought it should sound. And I was just sort of, not exactly like a puppet, but I hadn't internalized it.
So the inner Cecilia Bartoli had disappeared.
I'd never let her out, really. Because it's frightening, because the minute you open that, you are on display. It's much easier to hide behind the armor of, well, I'm doing this correctly, and the hand goes on the piano, and this is what Schubert sounds like, and this is what Rossini, and you present it in this correct way. And it's hard-earned, and you've worked very hard, but that last thing of cracking open and saying, let's see what happens. Because what I realized was I wasn't showing them anything of myself. And I wasn't really saying anything. And something really shifted majorly with me. And I was probably 29 or 30. And I said, that's the last time anybody's going to say I had nothing to say. They may not like it. It may not be their cup of tea, but at least I can live with it. Whether it's a success or whether it's a failure, it comes from me. And I just really decided that's the only way I want to do this. Because if I'm just doing what's correct and I have a big success, it's not going to feel like mine. And if I fail, if it's been guarded, I'm not going to really learn what I needed to learn. But if I put myself on the line and it doesn't work, then it's like, oh, I need to work on that. And then growth can come. And it was a devastating thing, and it's one of the best things that could have happened to me. And it really put the onus of me taking responsibility for my career here. There's something about the vocal world that we think permission and affirmation is going to come outside, because we're dependent on people to literally tell us how we sound. We have no idea how we sound. So we are dependent on people to tell us how we sound. Not a cellist, not a pianist, they know. We can never hear ourselves. We're dependent on people to cast us, critics to approve us, audiences to applaud us. And so everything, and because we have so much to learn, that we're always, when we're training especially, it's like we're always in the hands of somebody else. There has to be a moment that we take responsibility and that we take ownership of the kind of artist we're going to be. I think it's particularly hard for vocalists as opposed to instrumentalists to a certain degree. But until that happens, I don't think the world's going to be interested in us.
Interesting. But that sense of having something to say, boy, you have something to say. I mean, not just as a vocalist, but as a human being. I wonder, some of the projects that you've taken on, not just the repertoire opera, but the, Dead Man Walking, the new stuff. So after the new stuff that you did at Houston, then The Hours most recently, your own work, your Eden project, and the Seeds of Hope from the recording. But also, Dead Man Walking. What else is there? What else have I got on my list? Songplay, of course. Songplay. And War and Peace in 2015. So what's tying those together? Because it's easy to see, yes, here's this artist who specialises in this repertoire, and wow, she's fantastic. But then these new things that you take on, they don't just happen. You choose them. So what's the thread that runs through that?
I think it stems from, I love being on stage. I love being on stage. I don't always love singing because I'm always aware of my deficiencies. And it's like, but I love being on stage. But I really have never been comfortable with the spotlight on me. I mean, I know how to take it, in the context of a show, and I love that. But the stardom element is not anything I've sought out. It's not anything that ultimately appeals to me. And so I've been so earnest in my love of the music and the storytelling of what opera and recital concerts bring. And, I've never connected this, but, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and life was pretty good. There was a little bit of a Cold War for a while. It was a little scary, and then it all broke free, and amazing. And I think, we've got this. And, in America, all the civil rights and all that, and then things start moving. I was like, we've got it. And then, we don't. In a big way, we're faced with all this stuff. As a civilian, I'm looking at this. And my day job, or my night job, I guess, I'm singing about war and peace and love and union and jealousy and pride and joy and despair. I'm singing about all these things in an industry that is so artificial and weird, and you're supposed to have, white gloves on when you touch Handel or Rossini. It's all supposed to be this way. No. This is the way it's been. And, that's not quite the way Berganza did it. And it's all this weird thing of of sort of being a part of a museum, but still trying to be present. It's just weird. And yet, you listen to the fourth act of Figaro, and you think, he gets it. That's our teacher. You hear Lascia ch'io pianga, and you go, that's it. That's what we have to do. Beauty and pain and listening to each other. So I'm experiencing all these things. I sang Dead Man Walking in 2002, a true story about the death penalty. And that opens up all this knowledge of the penal system in America and whose life has value. I just didn't know how to function in this artificial world and as a citizen in the last 15 years. And I see so much wisdom in the things that I sing. And I thought, we're missing that connective tissue. Some of us get it in an individual basis, but I don't see it being presented as saying, hello, this music that you love, this Mahler symphony, that exaltation of nature and divinity and peace, you gotta take that home with you. It's not enough just to go, oh, lovely, lovely, yes. It's like the carry-on, yeah, lovely. It's not enough anymore because they're teaching us. And I really felt compelled. I've always tried really not to lecture an audience or to like be heavy-handed, but I wanted to invite them strongly to say, when you leave, how can you amplify this in your life? How can it stay with you? How can it teach you? How can it inspire you? And look, that really fires me up. I'm not so interested. I mean, I've done it. I love opera and I love music, and I take that part of my preparation very seriously. And I want to always give people as great a musical experience as I can give. But I just feel like that's not enough right now. And we have so much at our disposal in that repertoire, in the poetry, in the text. And I see our audience sometimes just complacent at just experiencing beauty, which is fine. That alone is a lot in today's world. But there's more there.
And more audiences as well, because the audience that gets to come and hear you and experience beauty isn't perhaps entirely the audience who needs it. So you started out, you were interested in music education. That was your first vocation, right?
Yeah.
And then singing caught you.
Yeah.
And now you're going back to education in different ways, in prisons, working with kids. And what you have with them is a kind of, when you're singing with them and for them, this kind of, they have epiphanic moments, really, right? They do. They see this music transforms them momentarily. How do you get that to stick? How do they take that on with them, given how expensive training in classical music is?
Singing is free.
Yes, lessons are not.
Yeah. Lessons are not, that's true, but sometimes lessons take you further away from the, and sometimes not. Boy, I'd like to crack that problem.
We all would,
Yeah. I don't have that answer yet. But I do feel this next phase of my journey is going to dive into that a little bit more. And I'll share a story that, well, I have a bunch of stories from Eden. So Eden is a project, it's a concert performance, sort of staged with lights, a little bit of prop. There's a journey to it. And at the end of it, we invite a local children's choir to sing a finale that was written by a children's choir. We prep them by doing a workshop ahead of time, and it's always locally based about what an environmental issue or a community issue that a local whatever. Sometimes it's water, sometimes it's fire, sometimes it's recycling, different things. And they've studied this, they've looked at it, and then they joined me as the finale of this concert to talk about investing in the world around us and taking care of the planet around us and to have hope. And I tell them they have to charge the audience to listen and to hear what they are saying. And it's so powerful. And we've worked with almost 3,000 kids now, and kids of all different levels. And one thing I said is, when we go to a community, don't give me the star choir. Like, we were just walking past, and your amazing boys choir was singing in the chapel, which they've been doing for eons. And they're so cute and they're so wonderful, but they get a lot of opportunity. And I thought, I want the kids that maybe haven't stood on a stage before. And we went to Luxembourg. And there was an amazing teacher there at the international school who got this idea in triplicate. And he invited a couple other schools to join. So we were building a bigger community, working together. And one was a school that was, the international school in Luxembourg, right? Diplomats, bankers, lawyers, kids. They have a lot working for them in their life. This was an outlying school, not nearly the same kind of opportunities, more difficult population, don't get the same opportunities. And then El Sistema Luxembourg, a new group that was made up of migrant kids from all over. And these three groups came together to form a choir. I mean, right there we have a blueprint for our world, right? And there was a girl, she was Iraqi, 13 years old. She was part of the El Sistema group. And she was new to the group. And apparently the lady who runs it was telling me later that when she sort of recruited this girl, she found out and went to talk to the mom. And the mom said, please take her. She sings all day. I have no idea what to do with her. So she came and joined us. And she was standing on the second row. I was in the center and she was there. And we had 75 kids on the stage with us. And she sang, and it was amazing. And then what happens is they sit and I sing Ombra Mai Fu to them. And I'm sure had never heard, she'd probably never been on stage with an orchestra before, and had probably never heard an unamplified voice singing 300-year-old music before, or classical music. And her eyes bore into my soul, and tears flowed. She just wept. Later, she told our group, she said, for my whole life, I've never felt like I belong anywhere. And tonight, for the first time, I know I belong somewhere. And she did. That choir was not the same without her.
Fantastic. And
so I don't know what the follow-up is to her. I mean, I'm not in a position to then facilitate the next path for all these 3,000 kids. But I do know, not yet, we'll see what happens, but I do know that experience is transformative. And I'm not talking about her as a singer. That's, of course, lovely, but as a human. For somebody I don't know her story, but we can imagine, 13 years old, migrant kid from Iraq. And going to Luxembourg. I mean, wow, what a different world of shocking things. At 13, you're just trying to navigate where your feet walk. And she found a place she belonged. That is everything. And that is, without question, the power of music and participating in music.
Yeah, terrific. Now, I have tons more questions, but I have a feeling it's probably time. Actually, in an unpardonable slip, I didn't bring my phone in with me. What's the time?
13 minutes to 6.
Oh my goodness. Then it definitely is time to open the floor to questions. Does anyone have it? Yes. Well, let's just wait for the roving mic so that, because we're recording for posterity. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and it was such a joy to be at your masterclass this afternoon. I have 2 questions, really. I don't know if that's allowed. The first one is to take you back to the professional side of your life. How do you cope with conductors?
And the second question?
And the second question is mindfulness.
So maybe I use mindfulness to work with the conductors.
That's an yes, thank you.
You know, the thing I yearn for and look for from a conductor and from a stage director is I want them, especially now, early on maybe it was different, but especially now, I want them to help me find things I can't find on my own. And I want them to elevate everything. And that means my favorite conductors are the ones who are incredibly gifted, that, you know, love what they do, but where their whole priority is the musical experience. Those are my favorite. Because when that's the priority, there's space for everybody to contribute. There's space to be flexible, to, oh, we could try this, we could try that. Yeah, sure. Or, Joyce, look at this and feel what this looks like. And then I'm like, oh, I'd never thought of that. Those are my favorite conductors. Luckily, I don't think I've hit too many brick walls. Sometimes it comes in that there's something I really disagree with and say, sure, I'll try, and then I make it obvious that it doesn't work. Oh, but then it's their idea that it doesn't work. You know, sometimes you have to dance with them. But I've never understood people that don't want everybody to succeed, because then everything flies. One of the best examples was at the Royal Opera House, Charles Mackerras. I worked with him one time, and it was Don Giovanni, and I was so nervous and so excited to work with him. I was singing Donna Elvira for the first time, and I was super well prepared, but super nervous. And he did not conduct for 2 weeks. He sat at the table, and he would sort of give a downbeat, and then he would listen, which was, on the one hand, liberating, and on the other hand, terrifying, because this is a set of ears that heard everything. And I finally asked him about a week in, I said, is it okay? Like, oh, you're not conducting? He goes, no, I need to hear where your voice wants to be first. He was letting me find my tempo and all of this. And then when he did take the reins, the tempo was absolutely perfect for me, but it wasn't my tempo. It was his Mozartian tempo, but it fit me perfectly. I don't know how he did that, but that's magic, and that's rare. But it was a good lesson that he didn't impose anything, but in the end, it was his tempo. Yeah. And mindfulness, anything in particular?
Well, because during the masterclass, on a number of occasions, you made the singers aware of where they need to be at when they're singing. And I just wondered how you get there.
Yeah. So talking about mindfulness and battling with your inner voice as you're trying to sing. It's a lifelong process. I don't see it addressed very much in classical singing. I mentioned it earlier, if you're an athlete, one of the first, especially if you're on any kind of professional track, one of the very first and constant things that is a part of your training is the sports psychology. It's what's happening in your brain. Because mindfulness, your body follows the mind. And if you're not aware of what is happening, chances are it's running like a wild stallion, and it's dictating your nerves, your fear, the choking moments where it breaks or something. And you have to, first of all, tune into what is happening inside your brain. And we were just discussing this earlier, that the first time I tuned into that, I was horrified. Because I listened to the language that was running through my brain unchecked until I clocked it. And I never have ever spoken to another human being the way I was speaking to myself. Not a stranger on the street. And I thought, I'm trying to sing Mozart with that vile, violent, aggressive voice in my head? How can I possibly make music? We do it because our will is very strong. I think there's something about young singers that we think we're being diligent if we're being hard on ourselves. That we need to be excruciatingly difficult on ourselves and hold ourselves to a completely unattainable standard of perfection. That comes because perfection is what's expected of us. I'm a big tennis fan. I love sports. I'm a big tennis fan. And Roger Federer, in the Grand Slam finale of Wimbledon, can lose 2 sets.